All right, here we are once again. Hello, everybody. I'm looking for my presentation materials here, and I'm going to, I want to share my presentation, but I am going to give it a little time. So as we always do with these webinars, do me a favor and text in. Nova Scotia was the first one to bring in. Sarah from Nova Scotia. Sarah without an H. My sister's name is Sarah with an H. Greece, Calgary, San Diego, Netherlands, Martha's Vineyard, France, Colorado, Poland, Montreal, Nuremberg, Estonia, no way, North Dakota, Wales, UK, Germany, Dallas. You know what? I love doing these things because it just gives me this little bit of a power trip, like I'm actually holding court at the United Nations, the United Nations of the book world, basically, which is all of you folks out there. So cool that people are calling in. Indiana, that's where, that's a trivia question for later when we get to the Q&A at the end of this thing. I'm going to give it just one more minute and I'm going to start because we have a lot to go over. And there's going to be about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So regardless of where I'm at 45 minutes, I am on strict orders from Basecamp that I need to end and take as many Q&A as possible. And thanks to you folks who were kind enough to write in early, I have a slew of questions that I'm going to go over as well. Wow, you guys are ravenous here. It looks like we got Austria, Belgium, Louisiana, Alaska, San Francisco, and San Miguel de Allende. All right, Spain, love Spain. Nova Scotia, Oregon. It's good. We got a good, well-rounded, I mean, we could literally solve the world's problems if we all got together as a group with this range of people, which is pretty cool. So I'm in Southern California today at my base camp here in California. It's sunny, it's warm, and I think we should go ahead and get started. What do you say? Thumbs up. Okay, and here's the thing. Let me just cycle through these questions here at first, but that's me in case you forgot who I am, and also I wore this just in case you forgot where you are and what you're doing here. Blurb, me, evangelist. All right, let's move on. A little bit of housekeeping here. You're gonna use the chat on the right like you're already doing to comment and ask questions. And don't be shy. If you have questions, I'm not gonna be able to get to all of them, but if you have something and it's super juicy and interesting, then I'll try to get to it as quickly as possible at the end. Also, if we add additional resources, you'll see them in the upper right, notification in the upper right. The Q&A will be at the end of the webinar, like I've already said. And lastly, yes, for all of you people who wrote in about will it be recorded, where can I find it, how long is it going to be up there? The answer is yes, yes, forever. So it's going to be recorded, it's going to be on YouTube, and it'll be up there probably long after you and I are gone, because once it lands on the internet, as we all know, it's impossible to get rid of it. All right, Andrew in Miami is checking in, the last person here. Florida, New York. Okay, let's get started. I wanted to start with a inspirational quote from this guy named Einstein. Don't know how many of you have heard of him, but he said the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. And I love this quote. There's a lot about Einstein I love. I love the fact that he took a year off to quote unquote do nothing, and it's when he developed all three of the most important theories in the history of our species. But I love this idea of the mysterious, because I think oftentimes when people make books, they make the book that they think they're supposed to make, and they don't make the book that they actually want to make. I would much prefer to see you making books that you want to make, no matter how strange or how many rules they break or how odd your friends might think they are. If that's the book you want to make that book. This is supposed to be fun. I start all my presentations with this slide, and I'm going to drill it into your head as much as humanly possible. Bookmaking is supposed to be fun. I don't know about you, but as a human, we have so many things in our lives that are not fun that we have to deal with. I got bitten by a dog on Saturday night. I would add that to the list. Bookmaking is supposed to be fun. So just keep that in mind, because you'll be far more productive and far happier if you're having fun. So making a great book, what is a great book? It's an impossible question to answer, which to me, in honor of Burt Reynolds, who we lost last week, it's like trying to choose between Cannonball Run on the left and Smokey and the Bandit. It's impossible because they're the two greatest movies in the history of cinema. I'll just leave it at that. So let's start first off. Today's presentation is about layout and design, and those are far encompassing topics. I could have taken this in a million different directions, but I wanted to take it in the directions that I have heard most frequently from being in the field. And the first and foremost is trim size and format, which is what What are you going to make? What object are you going to design? Oftentimes I run into a lot of photographers and the first thing I get is this question: what is the largest book I can make? Now the answer to that is 11 by 13 or 12 by 12. And the page count is either going to be 240 or 440 pages. The reason I'm putting this quote up is that most of the time when someone asks me this question, this story does not end well, because most people who are making books don't have the content or the work to support 240 pages or 440 pages. It's not that Blurb doesn't want to make those books. We do, they're beautiful. We've seen some beautiful examples of those, but that is a huge thing to undertake when you sit down to make a book, to make something that is that big. It would intimidate me, and I've made a lot of books. So trim size is really important. And I wanted to show you this slide. This is a project I did a couple of years ago, and what you're looking at is the same project in 3 different trim sizes, which is another point I'm gonna bang through all day long, which is with Blurb, you're not stuck with building something in a single format. So for example, I've got my little pocket book here in the front, I've got a middle-sized book, and then I've got the beautiful hardcover fancy book in the back. And you're talking about a price difference of, and I'm generalizing on the prices here, but you're talking about a $25 book, a $45 book, and let's say a $100 book. So it's not to say that you don't make all of these, but each one of these is going to appeal to a different audience at a different price point. Like, for example, your buddies or your friends may say, look, I want to support your work, but I can't afford a $100 book, but I'll buy the pocket book. I really like it, and it's small, and it's sort of informal. Whereas the collector of your work, or somebody that's a little bit more refined in what it is they want, or they have a specific thing, their specific style of book they're collecting, they may choose that book in the back. So rarely do I make something today that lives in one size. I make different formats of everything because it's so easy to do and so strategic. So when you're talking about trim size, you have options here, and I'm just going to cover 3. Photo books, which is what Blurb was sort of born on, the concept of making photo books. And these are the hardcover, you know, beautiful paper, high-end materials, etc. A lot of you are going to be making photo books. I've surely made my fair share. But we've also got trade books, and trade books are what I would say are a little bit less formal than a photo book, even though you can still get hardcover and nice materials, but they're priced a little differently. They look a little different. The sizes are different. These are something, if you don't know about trade books, it's worth doing a small test and making one, because I make a lot of these. I think this is a very strategic format. And finally, magazine. And for you out there who are, especially photographers out there, it's crazy if you're not making magazines. These are super inexpensive. They're beautiful. They are of a large enough real estate. They're 8.5 by 11. It's a legitimate magazine size. And the premium magazine paper is gorgeous. Every time I make one of these, I say to myself, why am I not making more of these? So I actually have a magazine series that I try to publish about once a quarter. I don't hold to that, but I try to. So anyway, when you're talking trim size, that's it. And let me go back one slide here. The larger the book, it doesn't mean it's necessarily better. Small books are less expensive and they travel really well. So a small book, someone might say, oh, I'm gonna throw this in my bag and take it with me because I wanna show someone else this book. Whereas your giant coffee table book, sure, it looks great on the coffee table, but nobody's gonna wanna carry that thing around. So don't get fooled by just thinking bigger is always better when it comes to making a book. All right, moving on. And again, write your questions in, and I'm monitoring. If you guys don't send questions in, I'm gonna report it to every government in the world. All right, how many images do I need to make a book? I have been asked this 1,000 times, and I think it's a great question because there is really no answer. And the answer that I'm gonna give might surprise some of you. I think you could easily do an entire book with a single photograph. And I have thought about doing this many times, and there are other publishers out there who have already done this, so I know it's possible. But imagine taking a photograph, maybe a photograph, let's say that you went to Africa on safari and there was one photo you made that you said, this is by far the most magical thing in the world. You could do a book with 500 images from your African safari, and nobody is gonna wanna look through that thing except you, right? Because that's too many images. It's just too much for someone to comprehend. But imagine if you showed one photograph, but you wrote the history of how that picture was made, where you came from as a kid, what influenced you, when did Africa first become interesting to you, what was your first experience there, how you got there, leading right up to that photo, and then the aftermath of actually making it and knowing you had that image. That to me is a fascinating story. I would much rather see that book than another book of 500 African safari photos. So in essence, it was kind of a trick question, but I think you can do a book with one. The other answer I will give you to this is that you should edit as tight as you possibly can. You don't want any extra weight inside that book because people don't have a big attention span anymore. So you got to be concise. All right, point number 3. Content of your book is going to dictate your layout and your design. So when I was a photographer, when I ended my photographic career, which was back in 2010, I was at that time doing 2 kinds of photography. I was shooting portraits commercially of children. So I was photographing children. And the second thing I was doing was long-term documentary projects. Those are 2 wildly different topics. Those books that I made were 2 wildly different looking books because photographs of children were light and bright and upbeat and funny. And the documentary work was serious and dark and a little bit edgier and grittier. So the book's design and layout reflected what the content of the images were. If I made a book that looked the same for both kinds of work, it wouldn't work. So it took a little bit of experimentation when I was doing this, but it pays off in the end. So I wanted to show you this book, which is called How to Build a Surfboard. Look at the design on these pages and tell me that this doesn't look fun. It looks like a book that someone just laid down with a pen, did by hand and sketched out like fin design and surfboards. This to me is a really successful looking book on how to build a surfboard. If this had black pages and looked like it was a technical manual for something, it probably wouldn't have the same look and feel. It's not to say that you couldn't pull it off if you wanted to do a book like that, but this is to me is a really solid display of design reflecting what the content of the work is. This is the magazine that I do on a relatively quarterly basis, but I'm only showing you this because this is the documentary work that I do, which is all black and white. It's a little edgier, it's a little darker, and so hence that's reflected in the design of the publication itself. So I didn't do a yellow cover and make it light and bright because that doesn't match the content of the work. The other thing is that I was designing with the original Life magazine in mind. And for those of you who are old enough, and I'm curious on here if you can chat in on the right, how many of you remember the original Life magazine? The original Life magazine changed global culture because it was prior to television. And a lot of times people had not seen what was on the pages of these magazines. They'd never seen it before. So Life magazine was the era of the picture magazine. You had Look magazine, Life magazine, etc. It was a hugely impactful publication in my life. I was published in it one time, and then it died, which had nothing to do with me, I don't think. But anyway, I wanted to build a publication that resembled the original Life. So I basically copied their cover design, changed the color palette to match my own, and bingo, here we are. All right, people are writing in, yes, 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 yes. They remember Life, and people still have old copies of it, which is really cool. So this is another magazine out of Sydney, Australia, called Caffeine and Concrete. And he's a person that does interviews and then designs artwork with typography based on the interview. And I've shown his work on these webinars before. This is another perfect example of content dictating design. So his issues are always very colorful, very graphic, very simple and dramatic. And it's reflecting exactly the kind of work that he's putting into the publication. So another good example. And you can find Caffeine and Concrete on the Blurb site and just do a Google search for Caffeine and Concrete. This is a beautiful magazine series. If you were going to emulate a Blurb bookmaker who's doing something very successfully and very creatively, this is a great person to emulate. So good, questions are coming in. I'm not going to stop to read them now, but I thank you for adding your questions. All right, let's look a little bit about cover design, which is our next point here that I want to cover, no pun intended. So covers freak people out. That tends to be my experience with people in the field. They're nervous, and rightly so, because the cover is your finely tuned delivery mechanism. You know, the bad cliche is you never get a second chance to make a first what am I trying to say here? I'm blanking out. You know what I'm trying to say. And the cover is what people are going to see first. It's going to make or break your publication. So what I often do, and I didn't do this when I started, but I do it now. Impression. Thank you, Mike. You guys know what I meant, right? You know, help me along here. It's Tuesday. It's relatively early. I save the covers for last now. So what I'll typically do is, going into a project, I'll have an idea in my head for a cover. Oftentimes that's not quite good enough. And sometimes I'll mock it up anyway, just to sort of deflate the pressure of coming up with a perfect cover. And I'll save my cover and do it last. Because oftentimes, even if I enjoyed that original cover design, by the time I get done with the rest of the book, I realize the cover was not good enough the first time around and I need to go back and tweak it. So don't stress, save it for last. Secondly, visual information is ingested 60,000 times faster than written information. So books that have visuals on the cover tend to sell and get consumed at a much higher rate than books that don't have visuals on the cover, so keep that in mind. The third thing is look at covers. Go to the bookstore, go to the illustrated bookstore, go to the magazine stand, and look at what professional designers are doing with imagery and cover design. That is one of the best things you can absolutely do. Fourth point is mock up several covers that you can use as options. And then the fifth point is take those mock-ups and test them on your friends. Test them on people that you think would give you a valid opinion. You will save yourself a lot of grief, because sometimes we fall in love with a cover design and our friends are like, no, definitely not. So I want to show you a couple of cover topics here and treatments that I've done just to give you some ideas of how simple changes can dramatically impact what it is. Now, trivia question. These are 3 different book covers that I did back in the early 2000s. Someone write in the chat and tell me what the content is of the inside of these books. Somebody's going to get this, I guarantee it. But so yeah, children, kids, right, you got it. But if I eliminated the book on the right-hand side and you only saw the one in the middle and the one on the left, it would have been a lot harder to figure out that there were kids in these books. And the reality is that not many people want to look at books of portraits of children unless you're the parents of those children. But I needed people, because I was in business making these pictures, I needed people to look at them. So instead of putting children on the cover, I put images on the cover that I thought would intrigue people enough to open the book, because they would look at the book and say, I don't know what that book is about. I can't tell what that cover is. I'm not really sure. And what I was doing was tricking them into opening the book, because I felt that my portraits of children were very different than what people would expect. And if I could just get them to open the book, it would work. And so I decided to start designing covers that looked like these, because it worked. If I put kids on the cover, forget it. Nobody would open it. So good guess, Andrew and Mike and Dominique. You guys win nothing, but you get a thumbs up. Moving on, I mocked these up recently, and I think I've put these in here, in full size. I just want to give you an overview quickly. So there's 4 different covers, all from the same story. It's a story that I actually didn't do. I just did a little bit of it, and then I mocked it up as if I did it so that I would have these cover samples. I'm constantly testing and mocking things up just to try to learn better design and layout techniques, but also just to practice. So same story, 4 different treatments, and I just want to go through these quickly because they're so different. So the story is about Steinbeck and about Cannery Row, and sort of, it's called Slow Burn Steinbeck, which is about the city of Monterey. But look at how different these feel. It's all the same copy, so the same title and subtitle and everything else, but the imagery and the color palette and the design has changed. So let's take a survey. This is design 1, design 2, design 3, and design 4. And which one do you like the best? Which one do you think fits? 4, 1, 1, 4, 1, 3, 1 and 3, 3, 4. So 1 and 4 are jumping out. So let's go back. Yeah, and I think some of these, like this to me is pretty interesting. This looks to me like a literary magazine. This looks like the cover of Paris Review or one of the literary pubs. This looks a little bit too surfer magazine for me. This looks like almost like it just doesn't quite fit the feel of what a slow burn Steinbeck would be. I don't think of big wave or people swimming when I think of Steinbeck. This is an interesting thing. You've got a little written journal there. You've got a glass of alcohol on the top, etc. This is sort of interesting, although it still doesn't quite have the feel. This is, again, 4, people are saying 4 is harder to read, 4 looks too conventional, etc. So the beauty of this, and someone wrote 3, 1, 4, 2. Oh, you're ranking them. Okay. The beauty of what's happening here is that you have choices, right? And so none of us we're not coming to a consensus here that one of these is the only option here, which is both the blessing and the curse of design, is that you're constantly playing on the psychological emotions of your audience, of your viewership. And so it takes a lot of practice and a lot of tweaking and a lot of testing to really land on that perfect design. And practice, I mean, what comes in this world? How do you get good at something without practice? So don't sweat it. Again, these were just pretty quick and simple samples. I probably would not have used any of these 4. I would have chosen one of these 4 and then continued to tweak it and refine it to get where I want. Make sense? And Kevin says none of them are failures. I love you, Kevin. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, let's go on. Point number 5 is about typography in layouts and designs. And I get so many questions about typography. Now, one of the great things about me being the person who is giving this presentation, and I know someone out there is thinking this, so don't lie. They're thinking, Milnor, your background's in photography, it's not in design. Why are you teaching us this webinar and talking about things like design and typography? Well, personally, I think that makes me the perfect person to give this lecture and webinar, because I'm not an expert. I didn't come from a design background, came from photography. So what I've learned over the last 10 years puts me in a very similar position to you in the sense that I'm still learning. So typography is an art form in itself. I could spend the next 10 years of my life studying nothing but typography and still not reach the level of a lot of the people that I've encountered over the last 10 years. But I'm chipping away, which is what most of you are going to be doing as well. So I wanted to give you just some basic ideas of typography in designs and layouts. So no default fonts, and I'm going to jump forward a slide and then come back. I see this all the time. So imagine what you're looking at is the layout of a Blurb book with the cover on the right side and the back cover on the left. I see so many photo books where the cover is in the default position that the software would have placed it with a default font, which is Arial. This is the first font that's in the drop-down menu. So the person who designs a book like this has given zero thought to what font they want to use, what typography, and the placement of that, plus the size, the color, the density, all of these different things that you can control. This, frankly, is just not good enough, right? You have to have more of a connection with the typography. So I'm going to go back a screen here. So don't use default fonts. Go through the font menu and find something that visually relates to the work that you're creating. And there are so many other places to get fonts. So what I do oftentimes is I'll go to another font source, find the fonts I want, download those into my computer font folder, and most of them will show up in the Blurb software. And that gives me a far greater expanse of fonts to choose from. Makes a huge difference. This is fun. Again, take your time, download a couple. Just don't use that default font in the default location. Second point, type is not an afterthought. If you're at the end of your book and you go, I don't know, just whatever, Arial 12 point, that's not good enough. It may be okay for a test book, but not the book you want to put towards the public. Number 3, find a font that has meaning. So I once did a book about Cambodia, and the first version of the book was absolutely horrible. The photographs were fine, the design of the book was terrible, and the typography was terrible, and I knew it within 2 seconds of opening up the book. I was like, this is not good enough. So what I did is I went back and I studied typography that had emerged from that region of the world going back, way back in history. And I found a font, I can't remember the name of it right now, that was designed in Cambodia or in that very close to that region. And I used it and it made such a huge difference on the book. I changed up everything about it, but that's what it takes, is just to find something with a relationship. Number 4, and this is a rule that you can break. And there are plenty of really amazing books through history that have broken this rule. But for you getting started or a novice bookmaker, don't use any more than 2 to 3 fonts. I think you can do a whole book with 2. If you need 3, fine, do 3, but don't go crazy. There is an exception to this rule. There was a book that jumps out at me from the 80s called Cyclops by Albert Watson, which really broke a lot of type rules and did it in a great way, and it's a legendary book. And 5, the last point is that I want to reiterate that you can go to external sources, download fonts, import them into your computer, and utilize those fonts. So don't be shy. That's the cover we talked about. All right, I just want to give you some examples. And someone said, this is a good point, the fonts on your slides are not overpoweringly appealing. The reason I don't use fancy fonts on my slides is because I have to use these presentations in so many different spaces and so many different computers. So what I have to use are fonts that are available on every single person's computer. So I always use the most basic fonts possible, because if I have to load my presentation on a jump drive and put it in someone else's computer and I've used a font that's native to my computer, then it defaults and moves the fonts and the sizes and the placements and it doesn't work. So they're not fancy, but they're presentation specific. But it's a good question. This is a book that I think has really interesting type treatment. And just to give you a couple of samples here. And this is a book I love. And I can't believe more people haven't stolen this idea, which is photographs mixed with what looks like a script. But this is an interesting layout. Look at how the script is laid out like you would read a script from Hollywood. And I think this is a really interesting pairing. They could have just done a simple copy block, but it would have all blended together. I think this is a really smart use of strategic typography. I love the spacing, and I also love the vertical type that runs down the edges of the page. I think that's a really smart page right there. The name of the book that I mentioned earlier was Cyclops by a guy named Albert Watson, who's a photographer in New York. He's one of the best photographers going back over the last probably 40 years. Really amazing guy. This is a page from a book I did recently. I took my nephew through New Mexico, and every 10 pages was another spread that looked like this, which was a giant, bold, dramatic slam of type over an image, which basically was cataloging, you know, 3 bodies of water we swam in or floated in, and each 10 spreads. But this is an example of, I just wanted to break up the monotony of photographs with, bam, a big page of text. This was a font that I imported from another source and downloaded into my computer. Okay, moving on to using text and page numbers. And someone's asking for the name of the book with the script. I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to get back to you on that. It's I think I've got the cover of that book somewhere else, but I'll have to look for it. So moving on, using text and page numbers. So one of these is pretty simple and one of these is pretty complex. Let's start with the page numbers first. The books that I make rarely have page numbers. And what I hear oftentimes is, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back one. What I hear oftentimes is people come up to me and they go, quote, well, I know I have to use page numbers. And my thought is always, why do you have to use page numbers? There are no police out there that are gonna hunt you and say, hey, we looked at one of your books and you didn't have page numbers. You don't have to use page numbers. Use them if they strategically make sense to the overall design. For example, if you're doing a book of photographs and you do not want to have captions, because captions can be a little distracting to the photograph, and you have an index in the back of the book that has the photograph, the page, and the caption, then you're definitely going to want to use page numbers to reference back. That's a case study of using page numbers that makes total sense. If you're not indexing or you're not making a book that people are going to jump around in, you don't necessarily need page numbers. So what I would do is I would lay the book out with them, turn them off, turn them on, turn them off, and determine which is the most impact on the overall design. Here's the interesting thing about how people consume books today. So our attention span has been greatly diminished over the past 15 years. So the days of someone taking your beloved book, and I'm going to grab one of my beloved books, the days of a person grabbing your beloved book and starting at the cover and very casually going front to back and reading every page, those are few and far between. What people do is they start at the back. I'm not joking. They start at the back and then they jump around. They're all over the place because their attention span and oftentimes can't focus on something that long. So page numbers have become more relevant in recent years because people jump and they may skip from chapter to chapter. Let's say that you did your safari and you did a safari in 3 countries, and someone reading your book looks at the table of contents and says, well, the only country I care about is Kenya, and they want to skip everything else, and they go straight to that chapter. Yeah, you want to have page numbers to help lead them there. Just a thought. Using text is where we're getting a little more complicated because, again, we could do an entire presentation just on using text. Most of us who are doing books, unless we're doing a portfolio of our best work, let's say that you're a photographer, you're doing a portfolio. A portfolio is just a sample of your greatest images. It doesn't necessarily tell a story. So a portfolio oftentimes doesn't have any text in it whatsoever. But most of us are making books, and books have a narrative, and a narrative has an arc and a flow. And oftentimes, even if you're telling a story with photographs, you've got to add text to help accentuate the story or fill a reader in on things they may not get from looking at the photographs. So I just wanted to cut through a couple of examples here of the same spread, but different treatments with the type. And again, all of these, you could continue to tweak all of these spreads. I'm just trying to give you some basic samples. So you've got the first look here, and you've got the second look. But look at what a simple change in the size of the photograph. So here I've got about a 2/3 image across the gutter with a column of text, but then all I've done is expanded the photo and reversed out the text. These are not right and wrong. These are just slightly different. And your reader is gonna impact each of these pages differently. So for example, let me go back. You're reading text, black on white text, which is a very easy way of consuming text. This looks kind of cool, but it's a little harder because you're reading reversed out text over an image. So your reader has to struggle a little bit more to read that text. Does that mean you don't design this? No, but it's something that you have to keep in consideration. Another example called Behold the Pony. This is about horse racing down in Del Mar, California, where I got access once to the backstretch before they let anybody else in, which was really fantastic. racehorses are pretty special animals. So you've got here, you've got text overlapping the image, and then I'm going to fast forward and show you another version of this. And again, I'm not trying to say one of these is better or right and wrong. I'm just giving you different ingredients. So we've got this, and maybe I put a third one in. Yeah, so look at this spread, and this spread. Personally, I prefer this one. So again, we're using copy, we're using title, subtitle, and imagery. But look at the overall feel of this versus this. Here we're getting a little busy. I do like this knockout quote here at the top above the image on the right, but I don't like how these images compete against one another. I've got a lot of text I'm trying to work in here, and I've even added a caption in the middle. So your eye is pretty, there's a lot of demand being placed on it. This is a little busy, and this is my least favorite. I think it's too busy. I'm not really liking the black backgrounds with the reversed out type. I think this is much cleaner and much simpler. This hits you with one bold, dramatic photograph. That's what demands your attention. I think the photograph is strong enough to cover the spread. The little image in the upper right is just a detail of the track. That's really just a placeholder, just filling that empty right-hand corner. And then I think this text treatment is very simple and clean. I think that's what you're looking for, is you want to express yourself with design, but you have to keep the reader in mind in terms of legibility, ease of operation, ease of taking the stuff in. All right, let's move on here. Now, even for wordy books, words without imagery, there's a very specific set of rules in terms of what size the font is, how you place it, what are the borders and the gutters. These are things that you have to keep in mind. Look at the subtitle. You have a chapter in one font, you have the title of the chapter in a second, and then you've got a third font for the actual body copy of the book. It looks clean and simple, but guess what? It looks like every other book that you pick up at the bookstore. There's a reason for that, because our brains are programmed to realize when we see this, to understand what it is we're looking at, and they're designing to make it as easy as possible for us to consume the contents. This is another book that I love to show, which is a book about Japan. And so I just want you to see a little bit of the design and the layout, and also kind of the fun, upbeat color scheme and atmosphere of this book. I think this is a good treatment of both imagery, design, and copy. It's legible, it's fun, it's bold with its color. The least favorite part for me are the photographs. I think the photographs in black and white are, you know, debatable, but again, I really love this book. Okay, write some questions in. Good, you guys are really firing the questions today. I like that. All right, we're gonna move on. We're talking about consistency and balance. And this is a really great thing that someone asked a question earlier that I love that I'll get to at the end that also speaks to this. So consistency and balance, when you're making a book, sometimes I'll see beginning bookmakers make things, and from page to page, the book has a completely and utterly different feel. I might turn a spread and there's a black page background and there's 30 pictures on the spread with captions across the bottom, and my brain just goes, and then you turn the page and there's a double truck single image across both pages, and it's beautiful and clean and simple, and you go, wow, this is great. And then you turn the page and there's something entirely different. That is hard. Unless you are specifically making a book to make people a little on edge, I would try to avoid doing that. I would look for consistency in how you design pages. So if you've decided to use a white border on images, I would stick with that throughout the entire book so that there's a consistency. Image size, I would stay consistent for the most part. Again, all of these rules can be broken, but these are things that really help someone ingest the entire book, which is the goal, not a single picture. What you don't want is the person who just opens up to a random page and goes, wow, you're brilliant, and hands the book back. That will happen, but you want to try to avoid that. So let's go in. And balance. Balance is what I'm going to speak to later in terms of photographic composition. So when I showed those spreads earlier, just now, there were spreads that jumped out at you and spreads that repelled you, right? You looked at something and said, that doesn't look right. Maybe you couldn't even define what it is that wasn't right. It just didn't feel right. And that's where the balance comes in. When you look at your spreads, you will say, this is it, I found it. Or you'll say, something isn't quite right. So these are a couple of spreads that I made recently, which is about a project about Paris. It's called Paris Into the Light. And I just want to bounce through these and show you that there's differences in the design, but there's also consistency. So that's spread 1, here's spread 2, and here's spread 3. So look at the consistencies. The same size image with the same border, vertical image, isolated on its own page. I could have run that same image across both pages. I could have run it small, but I've kept it simple and the same size. Very similar type treatment. So look at the title from these spreads. The titles on these 2 pages are identical. The image is identical, but I reversed this one out in Photoshop. I inverted it just to give it a little different sort of X-ray looking feel or negative feel. I've kept my copy blocks really simple and clean, easy to read. And then the last one, I basically played around here using, sort of breaking a typography rule, which is using multiple fonts in the same sentence. And this was a really popular design technique back in the 90s, and you saw a lot of this in the fashion world. So for those of you wondering, these 3 spreads were all pulled from different spreads that I found in the New York Times Magazine, which is a good source for me. I love looking through the New York Times Sunday Magazine to get design tips and ideas and look at what people are doing. So, but there are consistencies here. I didn't go from spread to spread where I had 1 image and then the next spread I had 20 images, because your brain sees a page like that and just can't handle it. So again, consistency and balance. I think the way that these are balanced with the typography and the imagery is clean and simple. There's not too much for somebody to consume here. I want you to basically admire the photo and consume the text. This is another example. I cannot read this person's, Kevin Danielson, or no, Brett Danielson, I think. It's a little soft. This is a beautiful magazine about Vietnam, and I just want to buzz through this because I think this is a great use of typography and imagery and color and design. I love how his type is overlaying the cover image, which is what I did with the pony picture I showed you a minute ago. I love the consistency of the yellow theme on the outside of the cover. This is not a heavy-duty, serious take in Vietnam. This is not looking at Vietnam and saying, look at the problems that this country is having. This is a book that is a portfolio looking at Vietnam saying, this is an amazing place, check this out. Yellow also historically is a very important color in the history of Vietnam, yellow and red, for example. Again, consistency, he's carried the yellow through the layouts, and he's also picked imagery. He's probably pulled this yellow from the copy from this building on the right. So you can take an eyedropper, figure out what color that is, and use it for your text. But look at how clean and simple the type treatment is. He's letting you digest the photo, but then also giving you a little copy to flush out the story. Again, double truck, cool picture, density's pulled down, the yellow consistently comes through, and nice, solid, bold use of typography. It's not a fancy font, but it's very legible, very easy to read. And now he just leaves you alone. He says, here's an image that I think is good enough for you to just take your time, consume it. I'm not distracting you with a caption, nothing. All right, we're gonna keep moving. Number of images per spread is point number 8. We are getting dangerously close to the end of this webinar, so I wanna make sure that we get through it and get to questions because there's a million of them. Okay, number of images per spread. This is a little bit of a tricky scenario as well because again, there is no hard and fast rule saying you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4 per spread. But I want to harp on the fact that what we've already talked about, which is the idea of making it easy for the consumer. And also, if you're, let's say that you're a photographer, one of the great skills of photography is editing and sequencing for a book, right? Editing is an art form. And so you always want to edit as tight as you possibly can, and you want to deliver only the most powerful images because you want to hold people's attention. And one of the ways of doing that is running fewer images, larger on the page, more dramatic and dynamic. So this is an example of an image that I ran, which is also from that Monterey project, an image across double trucks, clean, simple, no caption. This is an image that all I'm saying to you is, as the bookmaker, is what you're telling the audience is, this is really good, take your time and look at it. Don't blow past this. That's what you hope. And I'm crossing my fingers because it doesn't always work. Again, this is another image from a magazine I did. This is a plane landing somewhere in Australia. I can't remember the city, doesn't matter. Another image, double truck image from a project I did last summer in Wyoming. I do a lot of spreads like this because I spent most of my life as a photographer. These are super, super simple. I could have inlaid a second photo here with some copy and some text, which I would have totally done. I think that that's doable if I felt I needed to do that. But otherwise, I'm gonna let the pictures sort of speak for themselves. Now we're going to images with 2 images per spread. And now I'm gonna ask you, and I want you to write in on the right-hand side, what happens when I go from here to here? So you have the gutter down the center of the page. Here's an image on the right page and an image on the left. So your brain now has to deal with 2 different things. Your brain goes right to left, left to right, left to right. These images are competing with one another. So when you do this, you want to make sure that those images are complementary and not contradictory, because then the viewer's like, what is happening? Why am I looking at both of these together? So oftentimes I talk to bookmakers and they go, well, I edited, 180 pictures. I have to cram them in this book. And my response is always, no, you don't. You don't want to put 180 pictures in there, because nobody wants to see 180 of your pictures. They don't. They want to see 8 or 20 of just the absolute best that you have to offer. So Iniki writes in, I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong, but she wrote in and said, you're looking for a connection between the two pictures. That's exactly right. You want when I ask you, why are these together? You want to be able to respond. Moving forward, look at what happens when you put 3 pictures on a spread. Now, these are all related. These are my feet in all 3 pictures. There's a dead snake. There's a pecked basin from the 8th to 13th century, whatever. There is a consistency to these, the feet, but you're still asking the viewer to comprehend a lot, to consume a lot. It's getting a little busy. So I am a big fan of fewer images per spread and let them breathe. Let people really experience your work in its most powerful form. Point number 9, image size, borders, and captions. Yep, we're ending with a flourish here. There's a lot to go over. So I just want to run through these. I've got 4 slides for you here in a row, and I want you to just see, because everyone thinks when you're designing a book, man, just massive expanse of pictures across the page, which can look really good. However, you can also turn that on its head. So watch this. Image 1, image 2, image 3, image 4. Look at what I've done here. So just because this is small doesn't mean it's not powerful. This is a picture of a really loud, fast car racing across the desert. So you've got this massive amount of energy, and what I've done is I've crushed it into this little tiny photograph on the page, and in some weird way, it works. Now, I can go larger, and it's not that it looks bad. That's fine. If you're a photographer, maybe that's what you want to do. You want people, because other photographers are going to pick your book up and like look at it this close. They're the only people who do that, but they do it because we're weird. Then what I did here, now I've got an image bleeding off both ends, but also what did I add here? I added a caption. And don't lie, what happened the second you saw this is your eye went straight to the caption, which is what happens. People say you have to do captions, you have to do captions. You do not have to do captions. And when you do a caption, it is now competing with the image on the page. So oftentimes people will spend more time reading a caption than they will actually looking at your photograph. They do the same thing in art museums. When you go to the Louvre in Paris, they've done studies where people will look at that caption and they'll spend way more time reading the caption than they do actually looking at the photograph. So you have to keep that in mind when you're designing your pages and layouts. There's nothing wrong with putting your captions in the back and letting people identify. Here's another twist. Now the caption is on top of the photograph. Now, when I went to photo school, I went to traditional photojournalism school, this was considered a big no-no, right? Everyone was super classic and traditional. You can't put a caption on an image. It's blasphemy. Well, those rules are all out the window at this point. You can put captions anywhere you want, but it does in some ways work a little better. And in other ways, now it's competing even more with the image, which I don't like. Personally, I would not put a caption on this image. I would probably go, me personally, I would either go here or here, and I would just let the picture breathe and live on its own. So that's image size on the page. That is the primary reason why I wanted to show you that little spread. Okay, things to avoid. The last point, and we are 2 minutes away from taking Q&A, and I'm going to scroll back through this chat because there's a million things. Things to avoid. Right here, in a nutshell, only one slide I need to show. I have seen this book 1,000 times, right? And now there's an upside to this book and there's a downside to this book. What I love about seeing books like this is that it is very clear how excited the bookmaker is. The bookmaker is so excited that they want you to see everything at one time on the cover of the book. So let's just break down what's wrong here. The color of the cover is horrendous. There is nothing in the natural world that's that color. Although Inca Kola might come close, but it's not a great color for a book cover in my opinion. There are too many fonts. You've got 3 different fonts here, and you have far too many photographs happening at the same time. There's just too much happening. Your brain would never be able to consume it. Now, I mocked this up as a sample, but believe me, I have seen this cover 1,000 times come through the Blurb bookstore. So this is happening a lot. And again, it's happening because people are too excited, which is a good thing, and they're trying to do everything at once. So you want to basically take a step back, simplify, classify, basically, if I can invent a word there, which is to think about things in classic terms. One of the easiest ways of remedying this is to go look at bookstores, because professional designers will not do what you're looking at right here. They will show you the pathway towards the promised land of book design. I look at other people's books all the time. I have a giant shelf of books behind me that you can't see. I'm constantly looking and referencing. But this, in terms of layout design, is a sort of classic example of what I would try to avoid. Too many photographs, too many fonts, strange colors, and just too busy of a layout for someone with a busy schedule to really ingest. Okay, I'm gonna hit you with a quick thank you, of course. And now we're gonna take some questions. I'm gonna scroll back up here because there were quite a few. And I've also got some written, just want to reemphasize that these webinars will be on YouTube. So if you're missing, someone wrote in and said that they need to rewatch it on another day. Yes, it's on the Blurb YouTube channel. So that's out there. Let's see, author for the Cyclops book. Do you maintain consistency? There's a question about making family books. Do you maintain all the consistency and balance when creating a photo book of family using the same size images? And that's from Roxanne. Roxanne, I'm going to answer this in two ways. Her question is about doing a book about family, and I think that's a really great question because a lot of people who use the Blurb platform, thankfully, are using it to take existing family albums or slides or prints or photographs and sort of repackaging them and also archiving them for the future, because sometimes those prints or slides are going to go away and they want to encapsulate a family history into a photo album. So I think the photo albums are a little bit different for a couple of reasons. One, I do like to hold consistency, right? So I've done books on my nephews, books on my nieces, books on my wife, and books on my mother. I love doing family books because the only people who see them are families, and if you make mistakes, nobody's going to complain. They're all so thrilled to see themselves in the book that it gets erased. So I do like doing that. But at the other time, typically with a family book, in my case, my mom shot slides for years. So I have trays and trays and trays of Kodachrome. I have a lot of images, and we also have boxes and boxes of prints. So some of the spreads in the books have multiple prints on them. So what I'm doing is I'm breaking the flow of consistency with standard size images, and then all of a sudden you turn the page and there's a double truck of prints piled and stacked on top of one another. I think that's totally fine. I will equate it to a roller coaster. A book is like a roller coaster. I hate roller coasters. I love books. I'm terrified of roller coasters, but I still get on them from time to time like an idiot. When you get on a roller coaster, it does that horrible click, 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 click sound as you're climbing the top of this hill. They don't hit you with the drop right at the beginning. They agonize you. They torture you for a while. Which is why I hate roller coasters, and then they hit you with the drop down. And that's what a good book is. It sort of takes you on this roller coaster ride. So I do maintain consistency, but with family books, there's that one thing of saying, I've got so many images that I really need to get in here because I'm using this as a preservation tool that allows you to break some of these rules. Okay, let me see here. I'm gonna go to the sheet that I have. We have about 10 minutes left. This is a great question, which is about the difference between using white backgrounds and black backgrounds. And for whatever reason, I've probably gotten this question 8,285 times over the years. There is no right and wrong. However, when I started making books, because I came from the documentary world, my first assumption was all the pages and all the books have to be black. The work is dark, the work is gritty, it has to match, blah, 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 blah. But then one day, I looked through my entire bookcase, which is about 400 different photographic books, looking at the documentary books in particular. And of all the documentary books I had, a grand total of 2 had black pages. One was on an insane asylum, and one was on, I think, a country sort of crumbling in time of war, right? So really heavy subject matters. And I realized that not everything I was doing was that kind of drama. And I realized very quickly that I needed to readdress this idea of everything with black pages. So use black pages if it fits the feel of the work, if it emphasizes the imagery. The other thing that a black page works really well on is if for whatever reason your imagery on one side of an image has a hot spot that has no detail. Let's say that you're in the middle of the California desert in the middle of the day and you're stuck there and you have to make pictures at that time and there's no detail in the sky. If you used a white page, your sky would blend right in with the background and you wouldn't know where the image stopped and the page started. So a black background can really feel like a boundary on the edges of that image and can help a viewer really focus on where that image starts and stops. That's a good technique. Okay. This is a question that's a little bit unrelated, but it's for those of you using BookWrite, which is how do you move pages without changing all of the layout? And in BookWrite, it's very simple. When your pages are down the left-hand portion of the screen, at the bottom of each spread, there'll be a little bar with a little tab. You just click on that tab, click, hold, and drag those pages anywhere you want. It works. Now, the next question is my all-time favorite of the day, and it is completely and utterly unrelated, which is why I'm answering it. Because every time we take questions, someone writes in with something that's just completely out of right field, which is, it just says birthplace, question mark. So I will start with United States of America, and I will finish with a cozy little place called Indiana. So that has nothing to do with this webinar. But anyway, we got it in. 15 was another question that just said captions, question mark. And I have already talked about captions, but I want to reemphasize this because this is a point of stress for people. So I'll see someone who's so excited to make their book of photography, and all of a sudden they get into this quagmire of the caption. Do I have to have them? Where do they go? What color should they be? You don't have to have captions. I think one of the ways around this initially is to index in the back of the book. So just use page numbers, let your images speak for themselves, and then in the back of the book do an index that says, okay, on page 6, if you really want to know, this is the year I made the image. This is where I made the image. This is the equipment I used. This is what the captional information, that's what I'm using. That's a very simple way. And the diehards, the people, like you might have people, this is an interesting thing about audience. So if I do a magazine, I'm going to have readers who are interested in the story. I'm going to have readers who are interested in the equipment I used. I'm going to have readers who are interested in me but have no interest in the story or the equipment. So you can design based on who all these people are. The technical geek, the guy who says like, all I care about is what cameras you use, what lenses, what settings in Lightroom, he's gonna be all over that index. He'll spend more time on the index than the actual images. Your photographic peers might just never even look at the index. They don't care. They're just studying your composition, your light, your timing, and trying to basically, learn from your photography. So anyway, moving on to another question. I'm trying to pull one here from the, okay, this is a great question from Tim. What is a good size font to use for the main text in a large landscape book with lots of text? Is 9 too small? Okay, Tim, 2 points to make. 9 is pretty small. I am a fan these days of smaller as opposed to larger type. I think 12 is too large for me personally. I think 10 is a really good size. However, you can always print a sample by just doing a book that has, you don't have to print 11 by 13. Print a 7 by 7 soft cover, default size, and take the same line of text and print it 10 times in 10 different sizes so that you can use it as a reference in the future. I did this when I first started working at Blurb. I printed a lot of test books that I still have that I use as samples to see how things print. When I started making books, I was at 12-point font because why? I was not smart enough to realize that I shouldn't just use the default type size that the software had given me. So I went from 12 to 11 to 10, and now I am using 9 a lot. But I do get complaints from people that say, this type's too small. But I'm so jaded because I kind of feel like most people aren't going to read the type anyway, that I'm looking at type more as a design element than something that someone's actually going to consume. That probably sounds terrible, but that's what it is. That's my advice for you, Tim. So thanks for the question. That was a good one. Any particular tips about travel books? This is great. And yes, I have one thing about travel books. Well, 2 things. You got a bonus tip. I'm going to use an analogy that I heard in college that was pounded into my skull in college, which is the KISS analogy, K-I-S-S. Keep it simple, stupid. So travel books, a lot of travel books that I see through Blurb are too busy, too many photographs, too much information. It's you went on a trip for 6 months and you've got the entire 6 months crammed into this book. And again, the only people who are really going to want to consume that are immediate family members or other people who are on the trip with you. But if you want that book to appeal to a larger audience, you really have to cull and edit. So I would keep your travel books simpler. I would really edit. For example, if you have a picture of a African cat, attacking a gazelle or whatever on the plains of Africa, right? It's something that we've seen going back in the history of our lives. We've seen that many times. And you have a motor drive sequence of this happening. It's not that you have to use every single image in that motor drive sequence, because most people are going to understand what's happening in that moment anyway. They don't need to see the whole motor drive sequence. I would also, with travel books, I think your personal experience, what's happening in your head as you're making the images or as you're traveling. I personally like travelogue style books better than books of travel photography. I want to know about the artist. I want to know their process. I want to know what went wrong, what went right, what was funny. I want to see behind the scenes. That to me is a far more interesting story than just a whole bunch of pictures of like Africa that I've seen already 1,000 times. It's really hard to make something really original and good that we haven't seen from places like that have been so photographed, which is a great challenge for all of you out there to go in and make something that we haven't seen before. Okay. I love this question. Is Blurb working on a new bookmaking software or an upgrade of Bookright? No. You've got Bookright and you've got InDesign. They're both awesome. Someone else asked a cover about, is there another software I would recommend for book design outside of Bookright and InDesign? There isn't really anything I would recommend. I have spoken to people who design in Photoshop, but I don't think that that's the best program for that. Bookright is an amazing program for 99% of us. InDesign is incredible. I was intimidated of it for a long time because InDesign is like staring at a blank canvas, right? You have some oil paint and you have this blank canvas, and now it's on you. You have to make your first mark on that canvas, and it's intimidating. And I always felt that way about InDesign because the spreads are totally blank. It's up to you how every single thing on the page looks. But Blurb made a plugin for InDesign that allowed people like me to embrace the program, and it made a huge difference. I use InDesign a lot now. But the magazine series I do, which is this right here, this little baby, this was all done in Blurb Bookright because I wanted to prove to people how good that software was, especially if you're doing a publication that is not overtly complex with the design. Bookright works for most people. All right, so I'm going to go down here and look at the bottom. Let's see here. What the last question I have? Let's see. Oh, where's that one? Oh, this is a great question. Last one. I wonder, Dan, are there any strong signs of, quote, bad taste in a book layout? Would it be correct to say that the rules of composition could be applied to layout creation? Think about that. That's a really good question. So what the person is asking is basically, when you're looking through your camera, your viewfinder, and you're composing things in the field, based on your experience as a photographer and your experience in life, you will come up with a way of seeing the world that is unique to you. Your images, what you see in a scene and how you dissect it is native to you. It's like your fingerprint. That's the goal that all of us have. And so when you look at a design, I think that there is a parallel experience running there. Let's say that I go to the Blurb software and I use one of the templates and I drag my images into the template and I drag my copy, my text in where the template tells me to. And then I hit the preview button and I'm faced with this template. Now, I could have two reactions. I could look at that and say, that looks perfect. Or I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, something doesn't feel right. And this to me is the exact same scenario that I have when I'm in the field and I'm framing something and I make micro adjustments up, down, left, right because it doesn't feel right. And then all of a sudden the puzzle pieces lock together and I go, that's my picture right there. That's what I think. It's a great question. And I think you have the same experience when you're designing a book. One of the views that I love in Bookright is where you can see all the spreads together on the screen. And what it does is it gives you a bird's eye view or a canopy view of the entire book itself. And it allows you to drag the spreads and change the order of the spreads. I use it all the time because I think, in essence, it's like a high-level experience of what we're just talking about. Instead of looking individual spreads, I can see the whole thing, and I have the same feel. I'll see a section of the book that jumps out at me, and I go, that doesn't feel right. Those tiles don't seem, I need to move this spread over here and do this. So again, it's a puzzle piece, no right or wrong. That's just how it is. Okay, we have come to the end. There are so many great questions in here. I'm sorry I couldn't get to everybody's question. And I love the fact that you're having conversations with each other in the chat, which is so 2018. I love it. I'm reading about happy clients and copies being made, et cetera, et cetera. So And Kayla just wrote in to Veronica, Bookright does let you export a PDF proof, but it is not high res. You'll be able to import your book file directly from Bookright rather than export a PDF. So lots of technical advice out there as well. And also the Blurb site is a great reference for these things. So again, thank you so much for tuning in for yet another webinar. We have many more of these on the way. Again, it will be archived on YouTube, so you'll be able to come back to it and see it as many times as you want. Just keep hitting play, play, play. It makes it look great. And thank you all for tuning in. I know everybody's busy and you're tuning in from all over in all parts of the world, but I love hanging out with you all, and I love sharing a little bit of info. Good luck. Again, have fun. Take some chances. Print sample books. Print small versions of your beloved final project. You know, don't get wrapped up in trying to make something perfect the first time out. Just print little things, test the water, show them to your friends, get some feedback, and then go to print for real. So thanks again, and we will see you next time.